Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you all to Rob Israch, who's the president of Tipalti, helping to set the business, customer, and growth strategy for the company. He previously led global marketing, alliances, and the company's Europe business, bringing over 20 years of leadership experience to the company. During Rob's tenure, Tipalti has experienced 50x growth while helping the company receive a valuation of over $8.3 billion and becoming one of the select few companies in America to have made both the Deloitte Fast 500 and Inc. 5000 list for the last 5 years running. Before Tipalti, Rob served as the vice president of global marketing programs at NetSuite, the leading provider of cloud-based enterprise resource planning software, helping to guide the company through 10x revenue growth from a private company through IPO to cloud ERP market leader. Previously, Rob held a variety of executive roles at Intuit QuickBooks and GE Capital. And for those of you that don't know, Tipalti is a global finance automation company helping finance teams drive business growth by automating and streamlining accounts payable, mass payments, procurement, and employee expenses in one connected suite. Thanks for coming on the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, we mentioned it already, but just in your own words, can you walk us through your career?
Sure. I'll go back from the beginning. So, growing up, I was an artist. I painted, drew, sculpted, all that fun stuff. And so kind of going into college, I was kind of like, do I go the art route or do I do a more pragmatic, practical route that many of us kind of try and balance? I did notice, I grew up in Florida. I'm a Florida man, unfortunately. And so driving up the highways, I would obsess about billboards on the side of the highways. And at the time, I didn't really know about the field of marketing or advertising, but I noticed I obsessed about it. And when I talked to people about it, they had pretty much zero interest in talking about, font and messaging and that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that I've got this interest that no one seems to care about.
So how you're going to tell all your friends, oh, I saw this great billboard, and your friends are like, oh, all right.
Yeah, I'll be like, well, the message is totally off. The design doesn't match this. And they'd be like, okay.
Wait, how old were you?
This is
teen, college? How old was it when you were doing
this is like probably a little in the end of high school and starting college.
Oh,
and I was like, well, I'm trying to make this decision on which way to go. Yeah. And that's telling me something. So I started in advertising. After about a year in advertising, my freshman year, because I pretty much like right off, I knew I'd kind of go this route. I still studied art history and practiced art and that, but I kind of decided it would be a side thing. And then after about a year, I kind of said, well, you know what, like advertising is great, but I kind of like to think more strategic. I tend to be both analytical. My dad's a CFO. He's been in business, both analytical and then creative, of course. And, I was trying to use the blend. And then I learned this thing called marketing. And I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. You see the business data, you see information, you're blending and synthesizing this information. And then from there, you come up with creative solutions to help a company grow. So I was a marketer by trade. My career goals, frankly, was to be a VP of marketing. I think at the time I didn't even know what a chief marketing officer existed and was not aspiring beyond that. And so that was what my intention was when I graduated from college. I did a few internships with DC United, Delta Airlines, some other small companies, but trying to get into marketing. It's very difficult to get into marketing out of college. Most people want to put you in a sales position or another position. And so I ended up getting a role in a leadership development program at GE. And so I did finance for 6 months, e-business project management back when Sun Microsystems existed, like a kind of a joint venture between GE and Sun Microsystems, which was a mess, but it was fascinating. And to watch the different culture collision, website content and competitive analysis. So a lot of different fields. It was a great program, learned a lot. There's a bunch of things I learned along the way in those 2 years that I still apply today. And then after that 2-year program, I was like, all right, now I need to get a marketing job. I did land a marketing job with GE in Connecticut. Did that for a few years, got my kind of experience in a variety of different marketing fields. And then I was ready to kind of, one, from a personal perspective, because I always do believe in balancing your personal and your professional. I kind of think of the 3 Ps of place, people, and profession, trying to get a balance of the 3. So from a place perspective, I wanted to kind of go to a major city. It was like London, San Francisco, New York. San Francisco struck first, and that's when I moved out to Intuit and joined Intuit QuickBooks. And bizarrely, it was someone that I met backpacking through Mexico, who happened to be an Intuit, and she kind of, we knew some mutual colleagues who I guess gave good feedback on me. And so I came out to California. I'd done a stint in California and I tried to stay out here, and the GE forced me to move back east. So managed to get back out to California. I like it out here. And then was doing a variety of different marketing programs for Intuit. Did a fairly good job, I suppose. Moved to corporate Intuit. And then after that, I kind of had worked for some big companies, right? GE and Intuit. And particularly when I moved to the Bay Area, people kept saying, you act like you should be at a startup. And I didn't know what that meant. And they're like, just the way I moved, the way I communicated, the way I kind of go to gray space. Gray space is, the things outside of the box where people are like, that's my job and I do this and that. I kind of go to those challenging areas naturally, but people kept saying you act like you are startup-y, I think not in a bad way, but and I didn't quite know what that meant. But after Intuit and after a few experiences both at GE and Intuit and some of the challenges working for big companies you see with bureaucracy and politics and gamemanship and all that good stuff, even though there's a lot of good things about big companies, I was ready to try my hand at startup. And then I pursued a few companies that you'll be familiar with: Salesforce, NetSuite. I had my own target list and I kind of pursued them and looked for contacts and looked for ways in. NetSuite, I kind of did a unusual move. Usually you always try and make your career moves up and a promotion of sorts. There wasn't that opportunity at NetSuite, but there was a job I thought I could get in the door of and make a career of it because I had confidence in their own business model and that I could help their business model. And so I took actually a slight decline in jobs, which a number of mentors said, that's not usual. You don't go to a smaller company, Intuit to NetSuite. NetSuite was small at the time, in the 200s or so. So a few advised against it. And I did have some early regrets in the early days. I had some doubts of my decision, but it worked out ultimately. But I said, I'll get in the door here. I'll make myself a success. I'll help make the company success, and I'll get myself promoted. But I had to be patient. And so I made that move to NetSuite. It was an online marketing manager role at the time. So it was a little bit less senior than I was used to. And I had to kind of teach myself some functions I had not learned before. So I had to kind of really get scrappy and learn with my hands, paid keyword, SEO, some deep functions. I had to kind of study online and all that good stuff. But along the way, I learned a lot of skills I didn't have. I had time to reflect and kind of build out my communication style and all that good stuff. And then I did get promoted up to director, and then, several other times to wider roles, demand gen, and then international marketing, and then brand with NetSuite. And then after NetSuite, I was there 8 years, but around 6 years, I knew it was probably not the long-term company for me. And I wanted to be a CMO, and I felt like I wouldn't be a CMO at that company. So I did have that VP of marketing, CMO, same thing. And so I felt like it was time. And I also then wanted to find a company where I felt like their business values met mine from my perspective of what the best way to run a company is. And I found that in Tipalti. I didn't pursue Tipalti. They found me. I was open-minded to kind of roles kind of approaching me. And I didn't know who Tipalti was or anything about them, frankly, but once I learned about them, and I learned particularly about their their CEO and their founders, and then of course their space and some signs of word of mouth that intrigued me, and I made the jump. And now I've been there just hit 10 years actually. And so I joined them as CMO. Many years later, probably 5 years ago, we were struggling to get our alliances ecosystem off the ground. And my CEO was frustrated. And so I came to him and I said, I think I can do this. And so I took on alliances. I called up one of my buddies from NetSuite, who I'm still friendly with. I was like, so tell me about this alliances thing and what's the key to make this thing work? He gave a few tips and talked to a few other people. So kind of made that jump and kind of ran and built up the alliances org. And then I just moved back to California last August. So I've been back now for about a year, but I was out in London for 3 years building out Tipalti's Europe business, recruiting the team and running that division. That was an amazing experience, both life-wise and professionally. And then at some point during that tenure, Chen approached me and said, I want you to take on this role where you're overseeing growth, sales, marketing, customer operations. It took me a little while to get my head around that. So it took, I didn't say yes initially, actually, because I don't believe in just promoting or getting a role. Like I want to be set up for success or feel like I'm ready to be successful. Otherwise you're just going to fail. Right. And so that's not a good outcome. And so, but then I took on that role. I moved back for personal reasons, and moved back last year, but same job basically. And so I've continued doing that since. So, and in this role, like you said, I run growth for the business. So that's my career path.
I love it. As you look through, I mean, obviously along the way, you switch different companies. You kind of alluded to this in the very beginning. You seem to have this rubric you called the 3 Ps.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, along with that rubric, are there any other things that you use to figure out when's the right time to switch companies? And can you walk us through that framework?
Yeah, interesting. So when it's time to so the 3 Ps are all about life, like life balance. I believe in balance in general, both in business and then life with business and life in general. Around switching companies, obviously, if you're hitting a plateau or you feel like you for whatever reason you're in a company where you're not seen as a good fit for the company, or you don't feel like you're a good fit for the company, like with the way they operate, top-down management, micromanagement, whatever those qualities may be. Also, just like I'm not always the best to listen to my gut, but oftentimes when I've made a change, I've listened to my gut, and you just feel like I'm not a particularly complacent person. And so sometimes I actually wish I could be a little bit more just, content. But when I feel that boredom, where my mind's not moving, that usually tells me something. And at some point toward the end of most of those trajectories, either, I would kind of either feel a certain boredom, a certain frustration with the way things moved at the company, where the way they made decisions, the way people play politics. I don't have a lot of patience for that. I think it's wasteful for people to play politics and gamemanship. And why would you want to waste? You spend the majority of your life working. Why would you want to spend the majority of life playing political games rather than getting things done? So when you start picking those types of things up, and then of course, if you think you're just at a plateau, in the case of Netsu, I wasn't at a plateau. I could have kept kind of progressing career-wise, but I felt like I was ready to make that CMO jump. And I do like that trajectory too, of these kind of up and coming companies and building a company. I'm generally more of a builder versus just an optimizer. And I felt like it was just time, but ultimately it kind of comes down to gut to a large degree. Then there's the assessment of companies. I think the assessment of companies, a lot of people make the biggest mistake on. Like particularly if you're in sales and marketing, but for any role, like the biggest thing you're going to get judged by is your brand, and your brand is highly correlated to the brands you worked at. So if you choose a company, you don't assess them well on, do they have enough TAM? Do they have enough growth trajectory? Do they have the right leadership to make the company successful? Do they have the right like culture to make the company successful? Are they aggressive? Are they customer centric? Do they have an innovative culture? If the company's not in the right space, doesn't have the right values to win the space, they're not going to win. And so you can get whatever promotion and fancy title you want, but the company is going to be a failure, and you're going to be kind of labeled a little bit like a failure just because you worked there, whether you did a good job or not. At the end of the day, that'll mark you. And so I was always very careful and cautious when I jumped, that I was jumping to a company I had high degree of success, like high chance of success. And then I would jump to a role that I felt I could make an impact, helping that company who would be successful even more successful. And so when I jumped from Intuit to NetSuite, it was unusual in that I was taking a slight downward step career path wise, but I knew some macros and some trends around cloud and SaaS. They didn't call it that; they called it on demand at the time. But some trends on on-demand software, and I knew the space was open. I knew that in that case, NetSuite focused on the mid-market. I knew the mid-market was open because of my time in Intuit. And I knew some of the leadership and the backers, and that was a good sign. It doesn't mean there were tons of challenges when I joined the company and across the business, but those were good signs to give me confidence that if I did a good job and the company did a good job, they would be successful. And I wouldn't have gotten this role at Tipalti if it wasn't that NetSuite grew so well. And so ultimately, when you select the company, it's not just your role you should be selecting, it should be the company. That's almost even bizarrely more important than the role and the title itself. I wouldn't join if it's just to get a bigger title, because if the company's not successful, you're ultimately not going to be very successful career-wise. It's going to limit, and damage your brand. And in general, like and you and I were talking about this a little bit before, Rick, but in general, like if of course everyone's ambitious and they want their title and they want their career path, but if your focus is so about that first, but everything you do, and it's obvious that you just care about your own promotion, it's obvious you're just positioning yourself, and it's obvious that you're just looking for your next raise, of course you should be aware of all those things and want to. But the first thing is you need to make your company successful, and you need to make an impact. And it should be a substantive impact. If you're just playing politics and changing 5 words on slides to make you look better, it'll eventually expose and it'll undercut your ambitions. So if you just focus on being a team player, helping the company grow, truly helping the company grow and making an impact and showcasing that impact, I think oftentimes the rest takes care of itself. That means hard work. It means grit. It means analytics. It's being customer centric, being a team player, improving your communication skills. So, yeah.
What's curious too about the product itself, if I recall, wrote about you guys 2021 maybe, and so it's accounts payable basically, right?
It's finance automation. And actually it didn't before it was accounts payable, it was mass payment. So when Ken and I were talking way back in the past, the origin of the company, I'll tell the origin story a little bit and kind of how it evolved, if that's okay. So the 2 founders, and it'll tie back to what we talked a few times already about customer centricity, but the co-founders, Oren Zev, he's like the first investor in Audible and Shag and House and TripActions and Tipalti. He's incredibly successful. Anyway, he had a portfolio company. They're an ad tech company, and the CEO was literally spending 1 out of 5 days a week paying out to his publishers. And he called up Oren one day, or they're having one of their regular meetings, and he said, I'm spending 1 out of 5 days a week doing this. I can't find any other technology that can do this. If you can make this company, I'll be your first customer. And, Oren's got a good ear for the stuff. So he's like, well, that sounds pretty good. And he picked up the phone. Chen had just sold a company, and he was kind of taking a break while he decided what he wants to do when he grew up. And he called Chen and he said, would you want to explore this? And Chen, he was like, this might be a fun hobby. I'll check it out. And so he talked to that customer, and he talked to another, prospect, and he talked to another kind of company in the space. and he was trying to validate, is there a repeatable problem here? And so one, he validated as a repeatable problem. Two, and in that case, that repeatable problem, that customer would have called it mass payments to my global payees or publishers or gig workers or, talent or whatever they call them. And so he did validate that. But the epiphany that Chen had was the customer in that case was calling it global mass payments. It sounds like a remittance engine, right? A global remittance engine. Mm-hmm. What Chen's epiphany was, when he actually watched how these people worked, it wasn't. They were doing all this kind of payee onboarding to onboard all the publishers and the talent, and, the gig workers and the such like that. And there was manual, and they were manually validating. And then they were manually checking with sanction screening lists, and they were manually collecting tax forms, and they were manually doing approvals. And then they would jump into different bank portals and make payments. And then they'd have to communicate payment status. And then they'd have to do reporting. And so he's like, this isn't vast payments. It's a workflow. It's automation. And so that same philosophy, we're a very different company now with 4 different solutions that are all kind of combined in one holistic platform. But that same philosophy is kind of what we still have now. So it's that original epiphany that still ties that. And that epiphany came from listening to customers telling us what the pain. Now, he had to have vision to see that what they were describing as pain was different than actually what they were actually doing. And had to say, okay, how do I make a solution that anticipates their pain or kind of goes beyond what they're describing? So that was the genius behind it. Nowadays, we do accounts payable, we do global mass payments, we do supplier payments, expenses, procurement, a few other things in that vein. But it's all with the same philosophy as what is essential we need, depending on, of course, different companies have different pains and needs and workflows, but we address their pains holistically with an automation platform. And, of course, payments are just global payments are embedded in there just as just another process. We kind of, Chen likes to say that one of his, he was lucky that he did not have a payments background, because if he knew all the regulation, all the hurdles and how difficult it's working with banks, he might not have gone and naively just gone into that business model. But the fact he didn't know that much, and he just looked at it as a generic process and said, look, these processes have to be handled. It's an automation stack. Payments will just be one of the 12 chevrons we'll automate, along with all these other interconnected components. And he went in there, but that was the best thing, that he didn't have all that knowledge, and he could actually white space it, because that's why we do it so much differently and better than the banks and all these other folks that are kind of payment wonks.
It kind of seems to me, Robert, you're ahead of the curve in terms of Deal, Remote.com, Velocity, Oyster, all these companies now. I'm not sure how familiar you are with them. They're doing all that work to place people across the world, and they take care of the taxes, they take care of the accounting, they take care of the numbers. So like you guys were doing that before, all these other entities that are all now unicorn companies too.
Yeah.
Definitely. There's a little bit of a similarity there. And like, to me, what's crazy, and I imagine for the audience too, is like, all right, you become a unicorn company on basically billing. Like that, who would have thought of that, right? Like, you're a founder, you're looking for something cool and sexy you could brag to your friends and family, and it just goes down. Sometimes it goes, and I remember, because I went back to that article. So it really goes down to like not finding your passion wasn't for how do you pronounce it? Ken.
Yeah, you can. Chen is fine.
Yeah, it's not so much like that's your passion, but what happens when you start making money and you're good at it, all of a sudden you're passionate about payroll and accounting and remittances and all that kind of stuff.
And the passion is helping. Like, we work with cool companies. The sexiest part of our company is the companies we help. It's Roblox, it's Twitch, it's Twitter.
So how did you get all these? How do you? All right, so you have just a couple of guys, right? A couple of Israeli guys, right, that are coming up with something, and it seems like it came on a lark, right? It just fell into their lap. How all of a sudden do you get all these brand names coming to you guys?
Well, I think because Chen was so good at listening and identifying, this is the unique way to fill his pain. It's a visceral pain, particularly for the companies of the digital economy. So the gig companies, the gaming companies, the
But even
freelancer
then, they
companies.
couldn't do it themselves. Like
No, I mean
it's
they
just a pain
can.
in
You
the
can.
ass.
You
So it's
can build
like,
it, but it's expensive. There are some companies who have
is it?
built some of it themselves, but those they did them the really early days of their business. They made a big investment, and I'm positive they have breakdowns every day and issues because this stuff's difficult. Like this is the plumbing, and you talked about that in that article way back in 2021.
Yeah.
And versus we're specialized on this and experts on it. And what makes us passionate is one of they're sexy brands, but we're helping some of the world's fastest growing companies grow, and that's in the more the mass pay, the digital world. But every company has accounts payable. Every company has not every company has procurement, but every company has expenses and accounts payable, and we're able to solve those companies, particularly in fast growing companies, scaling companies, mid market companies. That's where it's not like they're monster enterprise and they just have resources left and right and they can pay Accenture to do this work and Boston Consulting. These companies, everyone's doing 8 jobs and trying to move as fast as they can and trying to disrupt the space. And we're a key component of helping them be successful in scaling efficiently, profitably, moving faster, moving to new regions, etc.
It makes sense because now I'm thinking about where for my search firm, oftentimes, we'll submit, we make a placement and you want to get paid on it. And then to get the money from accounts payable, it's like pulling teeth at times.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, they're not purposely, sometimes they are purposely high, holding on to the money as long as possible because they get the
Sure.
float. So they're making the interest on it. But a lot of times it's just like you have some like dopey, clerk who's just, out to lunch and not doing it. And so I guess it's one of those things that was ripe for saying, hey, we can make that
Totally.
way better with technology.
Yeah,
And make it
and
much
I
easier.
alluded to it a little bit earlier, but when I said like I knew that there was
Yeah.
I knew when I was assessing Tipalti and whether this is
Yeah.
a company I thought could be successful. One, it was like, is it a group of like is Chen and Oren, the two founders, people I want to work with? Do they have are these good, honest people? Are they open-minded? Are they analytical? Do they have too much ego?
Mm-hmm.
There was that. There's signs of word of mouth, which I always look for. Like, is this a company where customers actually love this company and rave? And I could tell, as much as the website was so horrible before I joined, and that scared me, they had a lot of case stories and quotes, and they were like, pretty bold statements coming from the customer with big ROI and all that good stuff. And you could see some emotion in there. So that was 2. But the third part is there TAM, which that's kind of obvious. As long as the company took on accounts payable and expenses, there's TAM. And then is it being well addressed today? And I knew I was at NetSuite and I ran demand gen, branding, and international marketing. So I had a pretty big budget under me. So I was constantly working with their own accounting firm and finance firm. And that was NetSuite with NetSuite, which is a great product. And they had their app ecosystem, just like Salesforce had. And I knew who all those players were. And even then, I was constantly working back and forth with their finance team and accounting team, chasing things, chasing card payments, chasing this payment, this and that. And I knew it was a problem. If NetSuite, with every bell and whistle on the platform, plus all their app exchange, and with a relatively robust accounting team, had this much friction just on paying out to suppliers, then guess what other companies are like? So I knew there was a problem. I knew there was a probably reason NetSuite wasn't using any of their app exchange partners because they probably weren't that good. And so, and I knew none of them were like scary type brands that I wouldn't want to compete one-to-one with. So I had a pretty good tell that I knew the TAM was there. I liked some cultural aspects, both customer centric as well as, my virtues of running a company and, matching with the founders. And I knew there was pain in that space that was not solved very well at all.
Another interesting part is this, Robert. It's, Tipalti is based in Israel, right? And
well, we're technically we're a Bay Area company now.
where?
But yeah, it started in Israel, but we're
okay.
we're a Bay Area company now. But we still have a meaningful office in Israel, and it was founded in Israel. Yeah.
What's in the water there? Because there's so much. The tech scene there is off the charts, right? Particularly cybersecurity. There's so much. Like, I know now? So it's moved back to like the Bay Area. But when it first started, how did it happen that you had this ecosystem of really smart technologists there that could producing great companies?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I would, before Tipalti, I was not very familiar with, working with Israelis or at Israeli companies. But I think, we talked a little bit about politics and gamemanship and positioning. Like Israelis by their culture, it's just, it's probably a generic Middle East thing, frankly, to some degree, but it's like they're just direct and to the point. Here's the problem. What solutions can we come up with? Okay, that's the solution. Okay, how do we get it done? They don't have any hesitation to actually do grunt work and do the work necessary. You read all these articles of these sexy companies and how they grew, and it makes it sound all grandiose and every day was like a concert you're going to. It's not. Like successful companies, they fight. It's hard work. You have to be perseverant. You have to have grit. You have problems every day. You have to confront. You have to listen to, whether it's employees or customers or investors, and kind of figure out how to, both listen to that and sometimes disagree or sometimes find solutions. That's the difference in the companies that make it that don't. You can have a big vision, but if you don't have a pivot when you got your vision wrong, because you're going to get something wrong in that philosophy or strategy, and you don't know how to, come up with problem solving solutions as a team and with your partners. And then if you can't execute it's freaking worthless. And so, and some people don't know how to execute, or they don't want to execute. They're like, they want to stay at a certain 20,000, 40,000, 100,000 foot level. And, they don't know how to, that's okay if you know how to lead execution down the stream. If you can't be a successful company. And if you look at, Steve Jobs and, numerous examples of folks, yes, they were strategic, but they knew how to go down to details or get their people to go down to details and execute flawlessly. And, that doesn't get written up enough, in my opinion.
Going into those details, you mentioned this many times throughout our discussion here, this concept of customer centricity. Can you break that down for us? Because I don't think there's any company that wakes up and it's like, you know what, I'm going to screw people over today. Like even the like baddies that we think about, the cable companies, the TV companies, the phone companies, whatever. Like even that, I really want to believe that they don't wake up and say, how do I make life more horrible for my customers? Like, so
I don't
how
know.
can we
You're a
tell?
nicer guy than I am, Rick. I don't know if I
Yeah,
agree with that.
I don't know if I
Really?
agree with you, Rick.
I don't know.
Oh no.
I think there's some companies that there's the means and the ends. You're in business. At the end of the day, the end is to make profit and to grow and the such like that. Some people and business models and companies go straight to the ends. And yeah, they'll go backwards and do some of the means, but they'll just do the absolute minimum required to get to the means to get to the ends. And oftentimes, like the taxi companies, they will get disrupted by someone who, who looks at it and says, you know what, this is kind of a shitty customer experience. I'm gonna turn it on its head. And they're just waiting to get disrupted. And there are many successful companies who actually go to the ends, unfortunately, really fast. You can be a successful company that way. But I would argue generally the more persevering companies, and they're not perfect either, but companies like an Apple or a Slack or Salesforce, they find the right balance between the ends and the means, or the means and the ends, I should say. Recognize that you basically have to still be differentiated. You still have to deliver value to your customer. You need to listen to your customer, make the customer feel like they're listened to. You have to communicate with the customer. You have to ideally create a community with your customer. And yeah, you still have to run a company that grows, that satisfies investors. You still have to run a company that's profitable. You still have to have a company that can find a pathway to get to the ends. But the best way is if there's kind of you're using the means to get to the ends, and that customer centric. It's a cultural thing, right? It's that all employees are infused with this, that the vision and the mission has that in its essence, that people can get behind it, that customers feel your passion. that it's part of your literally company values. It's how part of your hiring and promotional pedigree. And I'm not saying we're perfect at it either, by the way, but you know, we recognize it's critical, and it's in all those things I just talked about. So
All right. If I can make a tangent here, did you mention about Salesforce? Did you catch John Mulaney's
I didn't. I didn't
comment?
actually. I missed it. So educate me.
Yes.
This will be
Can I
interesting.
give you a little? All right. So he's at Salesforce, right? And the Salesforce big gala, right? And this is shocking because they probably paid him a whole lot of money because now he's a pretty famous comedian. And he was just ragging on Salesforce, basically saying, you have 45,000 trailblazers. How can you be a trailblazer
Yeah.
when you have 45,000? It doesn't sound it doesn't sound like it's very unique and very specific for you. I mean, and he was just
Yeah.
like, I don't think it, what you pay, how much did Mark Benioff pay this guy to trash
Yeah.
Salesforce? This is nuts. Then he said something to the effect, and I'm not going to do it justice, where Millennium was saying he has a young kid, evidently, like they'll be throwing a wiffle ball around, and each other's going, "Hey, we're great, we're doing great, we're doing great," and he's saying that's what it's like for everybody who's there in this, dream force kind of thing,
Totally.
which crazy. I mean, right? Rick, you
And
probably
it's
would.
true. It's kind of true. It's like the Apple users. I mean, you know, I'm probably going to
Yeah,
make some slight enemies here, but how many millions of Apple users are there, and they all think they're being unique and expressing
yeah,
their. And I'm sure some of you and I use an
yeah,
iPhone and all that,
yeah.
but you know, we're not being unique. Millions and millions and millions of people have iPhones,
Yeah,
but that's a trick. If
yeah,
Salesforce can make people believe that, and Apple can make people buy into that, and Slack
yeah.
and the same. And it did start, like, if you go back, I was one of when I was at Intuit, the
Mhm.
division of Intuit I was in was one of the early customers of Salesforce. And I remember back then Intuit corporate was trying to force us to buy Oracle CRM, I guess it was called. I don't remember what they called it, or Siebel CRM, Siebel CRM, and we were like, no, we're going with Salesforce. And I remember we went to these community events they had with other kind of sales leaders and the such like that, and you could just feel this energy in the crowd, and people were excited, and you felt like you were a part of a movement. They managed to scale it, right? It's impressive that they could scale it, but yeah, it's true. At some point, you're just following the herd to a degree, but oftentimes those herds had a movement from the early days, and that's because they had a vision that inspired people, and they kind of started creating a movement. And Benioff absolutely started a movement.
I mean, for folks that are trying to figure out their next role, I mean, you kind of mentioned this when Tipalti reached out to them. You're a marketer, you hadn't heard of them, so that's kind of a red flag off the bat, right? Because you're generally going to know all the best practices, the top companies. And you find out after doing your research, your due diligence, speaking with the founders, the executives, and getting to understand how they work, their approach, you were able to discover this. Is there a way that you can kind of help teach our audience how to speed run that process? Does it mean
Hmm.
that you have to be a customer of a company to understand if they are customer centric, or a customer of their company to know their values, that if they're living
Yeah.
it out, or what's the deal there?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, how to assess those things. So I'll kind of repeat the recipe book there. So I guess the
Oh,
one thing is you
nice.
have to think about them. Like, the first thing is think about the business like you're an investor almost, or an investor, or someone that, think of from an investor perspective, or a business strategist. Is this a good business? Because it could be a good culture, but if it's not going to be successful, it's not going to be successful. You're out on the road soon enough, and your brand will be marred. So first things, assess the business. Is there TAM? Is it a big enough market, or a market you can dominate in? Even if it's a small market, if you dominate enough, it can work pretty well. So is it a big enough market, and/or a market that they can dominate? Is there another scary competitor in there? Like, if you see a Salesforce in a space, or you see a Slack in a space, or you see a Stripe in a space, my advice to you is probably don't go into that space, frankly. Like, unless there's such a disruptive genius idea with shitloads of money behind it, it's going to be hard to win in that space. So is it a big enough market? Is there a substantive, tangible differentiator? Because marketing and sales only go so far, right? You want product market fit and differentiation in there. You can only put a lipstick on a pig so much, right? It's got to have meaningful, difference that can be sustained. Is there a scary competitor already doing this, or is it just kind of, you can tell? I don't know. I feel like you can tell serious companies from not serious companies to a certain degree. I felt in this case there were a lot of not serious companies I knew. In the NetSuite case, there was no other companies really in that space. It was alone in there. So that's the company strategy side first. And in there, I mentioned word of mouth in there, which ties back to customer centricity. But if you can see signs of word of mouth, testimonials, case stories, even if the design is really shitty and the website's really junky, but you're looking for that type of, you can go in Google and type for the company name and what are the reviews? All right, 2 stars and 3 stars, like 4 and 5. How effusive are the actual commentary? And companies try and game this, of course, but you can get a sense, and you can always ask around with your friends and network as well. So that helps on the first two. Is this company real? Do they have long-term growth? Then there's the cultural aspects, and it's kind of like, there's things you can ask, but what you're trying to get the essence of is in the interviews, like, do you like these people? Are they people you can trust? Do they seem like humans? Like, I think old school leadership was different than it is today. But people generally want to be led by people who are open, honest, and human, and they can relate to, and they, of course, they can be inspired by, and feel like they can learn from. But also they want to be led by people who are pretty human, and I've learned this over the course of my career because I started a little robotic, to be frank, and and I kind of learned quickly that, actually it's not just who has the best ideas and who's the smartest and who worked the hardest and who's the most analytical, but you also have to pull people along the ride and, work with people over time and actually pull in a little bit of your non-work psyche into your work psyche. And, so are these people, when you're talking to, like, do you feel there's a personal rapport with them? Do you like them as a person? Would you be friends with them? Of course, you want them to be smart and accomplished and impressive, but are they good people? And do they have that ability to motivate people and pull them along for the ride? Because you can have good ideas if you can't get people behind your ideas or mobilize people around those thought processes, convince people to take the career jump and the journey with you, you're toast. Did I answer your question? I'm trying to remember what the original question was. Yeah.
No, you did. I appreciate that advice, because I think oftentimes it's very easy to get caught up in so-called prestige, or just looking at the numbers in terms of, am I going to get promoted? Yes, no. What's the numbers in terms of the job offer, the stock that's being offered, and just really deciding your next career prospect or the next job based on those figures. But it really needs, there's a lot to be said in what you're describing in terms of going beyond that and saying, hey, actually, let's look at the company, because that company's brand is actually going to imprint on my personal brand as a professional going forward.
Totally.
Right? It's about impact in terms of, am I actually going to learn the skills so that I can survive outside of that company or outside of that role? Right? Thinking a bit more long term. And so all these are kind of human factors, as you put it, not being a robot that's just going to do code or going to do marketing, copy, or whatever that might be, and really thinking more holistically, I think is a good reminder that a lot of us need or should take.
Yeah, and if you're going to work at this job, probably the majority of your time, unfortunately,
Right.
and and then you have to be phony the whole time, or put on an act, or not be yourself. You're not going to be really happy. You're not going to do your best work. Ultimately, it's the same as kind of ideally pursuing something you're passionate about career wise. But if you have to be if you're not true to yourself, then the workplace, you're not going to be as effective as you would otherwise, because you're just not going to be as happy and as passionate and the such. So you want to find a place that you can actually relax and, do the job the way you would like to do it, generally speaking. And so that's where the values and the kind of match comes in.
No, I appreciate that advice, and thanks for sharing it with our audience, Rob. Awesome. That's a wrap, guys.
Can I just share this before we go? Because the reason I asked about the Israeli companies, I was trying to lead to a certain direction, but I couldn't do it. What's blowing me away, Rick, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, Rob. You heard what happened with Hamas fairly recently, right?
Yeah.
Dude,
Right.
the craziest thing, that this is what I meant about like the technology in Israel. So they set up this company, right, to sell pagers
Yes.
because they were able to crack the cell phones, right?
Crazy, huh?
So then you have this company that sells these pagers, and you get the Hamas terrorists who buy the pages. But I would imagine the Mossad behind the company that's doing it were making it hotter and hotter and doing something there. So eventually they could, I guess, hit the switch and it could blow it up. So then you have these pagers that like are in your pants pockets or in your whatever, and blow your wieners off.
Yeah.
Crazy.
How can that?
It is spy movie.
It is brilliant.
Is that the funniest and the craziest thing ever? That's what I was meaning about, like the technology. It's insane. It's crazy.
Yeah, they have. I mean, we were talking about community, but they have created this community of even most of our team now is pretty like, from across different cultures and places at this point. But we have still a decent amount of C-suites in the mix that are from Israel, but almost to a T, every single one have gone to that Technion University, which
wow.
and
like the
the
MIT
Technion
of
University, they take the smartest people. They all have to go to the army,
Right.
so they have to, but they take them and they put them in this place where basically is incubating technology geniuses, because they're all hanging out with each other in a safe place so they don't get killed, but they're helping achieve the goals. So I had no idea about all this until I joined, and then you went to Technion, you went here, but they've got this kind of they've created this kind of community of people all around, other really smart people, and then in this kind of pressure cooker environment. So
it's wild.
Yeah,
I've interviewed a lot of these guys, and it's like it's intense. Like you get this like master's degree, even better, whatever's higher, graduate degree in just tech, cybersecurity, all this kind of stuff. So they come out of the army, not so much killing people, whatever, but like building these great companies. But then every once in a while, blowing wieners off of people.
Yeah.
So.
just meeting all these nerds together, shaking them up in the pot. Oh wow! Well, it was so great to meet you, Rob.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a good,
really fun conversation.
Yeah, I went fast. I didn't even realize we're at the end of the interview. So
what time? Oh yeah. See, that's what the cool thing with the podcast, when you just start talking, just shoot, and it just flies by, which is awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.